You're listening to the Decidedly podcast with Sanger Smith and Shawn Smith. Our mission is to help business owners like you defeat bad decision-making so you can improve your health, wealth, and relationships. We do this by digging deep into the stories and expertise of our guests and distilling their knowledge into actionable wisdom for you to carry into your life and business. If you're new to the show, welcome. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. If you prefer to watch this week's episode, head on over to YouTube for the full video. Now, let's get into this week's episode and defeat bad decision-making in your life and business.
What are scars that you have, and what did you learn from getting them?
I have a scar on my knee, and it's because I tried to do like a baseball slide, like a Patrick Kane just scored a game-winning goal in the Stanley Cup final, slide on both my knees.
Yeah.
Like I tried to do that on a wooden ramp.
Oh, that probably didn't go well.
Yeah, I was 8.
Yeah.
There's a nail sticking out.
Oh.
So I slid into a nail and it tore up my knee. And I guess what I learned was, one, you can't slide on wood very well. And then 2 is I don't need to try to look cool in front of people.
Oh, no.
I was trying to look
no
cool.
risk there.
What do you have? Some scar story?
I've got a scar. It's sort
you
of
have a
faded.
sick scar on your finger.
Well, I've got a scar that's sort of faded now. It's right in the center of my forehead, and it was more prominent when I was younger. And I had when I was at my grandmother's house, I went running through the kitchen and slipped on the freshly waxed floor, went out the back screen door, down the concrete steps.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had to take me and go get stitches right in the middle of my forehead. And so I've still got stitches in my forehead, and my parents took me to some high school football game.
Okay.
And we're leaving, but the game's still going. So my parents are kind of getting farther and farther away from me. I'm kind of looking off to my right, watching the game through this chain link fence. And I hear them yell for me. And so I start running full speed while still watching the game with my head turning to the right. And so you get an idea how this is probably going to end. At the last minute, I turned to face forward right into a telephone pole.
Nice.
And split that scar and those stitches wide open again. And so then I had a scar that, was right in the middle of my forehead, like, Harry Potter. And what it taught me was, watch where you're going.
That's a good lesson.
I think it's a really good lesson, but I think it's deeper than just sort of watch physically where you're going. Is be aware of where you're watching, where you're going, because that's where you're going to go. And you get to pick where you watch. You get to pick where you look.
To pick what you focus on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Our guest today, Michael O'Brien, he shared a lot about focusing on what you choose to focus on. He has such a fascinating story. He was a cyclist and got hit by a car, nearly lost his life right there on the pavement at the scene of the accident. The doctors told him, hey, Michael, you're never going to be able to ride the bike again. You need to find some other hobbies. And instead of doing that, instead of falling into despair, he chose to have a positive mindset on that tragedy, chose to be grateful, chose to focus on improving his body, improving his life, and being thankful for the things that he did have. And ultimately, he improved his body so much that he was able to cycle all the way across the country. So Michael's here today to talk to us about that and help us get focused on the things that we choose to focus on, not running into light poles like Shawn said. So stick around. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn, most importantly, how to focus on what really matters. I'm Sanger Smith with my dad, Shawn Smith, and this is Decidedly. Michael, today's my last bad day.
All right.
Because you're here.
All right. That's good. We're all working towards eliminating bad days.
Yeah, you're gonna get me fixed. I'm pretty confident. I lean towards pessimism instead of optimism, That's something
You lean towards it?
Yeah, I think generally
you reside in that camp.
Well, the question is why? Like how is it protecting you?
That's very
there's the
deep.
question.
That's a deep question right off the rip, right? So like we do things for a reason, whether it's conscious or unconscious. So like there's a reason the play is pessimism.
So what are the potential reasons why someone might tend to be pessimistic?
It lowers expectations. So if you're really optimistic, like this is going to be amazing, it's going to be a great day. If we veer towards the pessimistic side, it's like, well, I don't know, like the bar's low. So if we set the bar low, in a lot of ways, it's easier to get above the bar and get over the bar. So then we can feel good at the end. Sometimes when we're optimistic, we have the bar pretty high, and then we can get disappointed that if we run into a day that doesn't meet our expectations. So having some, pessimism, I think is healthy. So like having your last bad day isn't necessary. It doesn't hinge upon pessimism or optimism. It really goes into like how you sort of label your experience.
I think this is one of the reasons a lot of people root for the underdog too. There's no risk in it. You set the bar low.
They were kind of expected to lose.
If they win, it's a big win.
I like to only root for the mega favorites like the Patriots.
Yeah,
I love to root for the
Patriots. That's an unfortunate thing.
Still,
so
not now.
But, still, but now the Patriots are sort of the underdog, so they might be like, like everyone rooted for the Red Sox, right? They just, there's like because it was sort of easy to root for them, like they
hadn't won in 100 years.
Yeah, they could, like, or the Cubs, like they never won, and then as soon as the Red Sox won, they became like jerky fans, and they started expecting to win everything,
Yeah.
So like, but yeah, there's something like, to root for the underdog. There's a low risk, like they're not expected to win, and you put your energy behind that, and you can have like a really big, enthusiastic thumbs up, like that's awesome. But if you're rooting for the favorite all the time, one, you can get somewhat entitled, but also the bar is set pretty high. So
yeah,
if they don't win, you can have a pretty crushing defeat.
So speaking of that, Michael, we were talking about sort of having a bad day. Tell me about your last bad day. Take me through that story.
Yeah, that's obviously a really powerful story. So it was 2001. As we sit here today, I'm coming up to the anniversary of it in a few weeks. So at that point in time, I was 33 years old. We had 2 daughters. We still have 2 daughters. So they were 3.5 years old at the time, 7 months old. My wife and I had been married 7 years at the time. And I brought my bike out to a company offsite meeting in New Mexico. We were north of Albuquerque, south of Santa Fe. So in the middle of nowhere. They had put a new fancy resort out there, and we were the first big meeting. And I brought my bike out because I had this goal. I still have this goal of riding my bike in every one of the 50 states. And New Mexico had not been conquered yet. So I brought my bike out. I was going to get a few laps in during the morning before the meeting began, before they tortured you with PowerPoint and team building exercises and all that jazz. And on the 4th lap, I had a 2-mile loop out the back side of the hotel, up the main drag. Easy 2 miles, because was going to do about 10 laps, 20 miles, easy peasy. On the 4th lap, I came around a bend, and a Ford Explorer going about 40 miles an hour was coming right at me.
Oh, were they driving on the wrong side of the road or what?
They were driving on the wrong side of the road. Somehow they crossed over fully into my lane. We still don't know why. He said he was avoiding a coyote. And as a suburban kid on the East Coast, if there was a coyote anywhere in the vicinity, I would have hightailed my little rear end back to the hotel. So I don't think that was the case. I think he was just distracted. He was trying to cut the apex of the turn. He was speeding. The speed limit on the road was only about 25 miles an hour. It was a service road. It was a narrow road. And he was speeding into work. The truth be told, he was coming into work to set up for our meeting.
Oh.
He was working our meeting. And I remember the sound of me hitting his grill, and then the sound I made when I went through his windshield. So I blew a hole in the windshield. Then he came to a screeching halt. I still remember the screech of the brakes. And then I made a thud as I came to the asphalt below. That knocked me unconscious. When I regained consciousness several minutes later, I was surrounded by EMTs. So the police were there. The state trooper was there because in New Mexico, the only agency that can pronounce someone dead at the scene of the accident is the state trooper. So the whole team there thought I wasn't going to make it. So they called the state trooper in. There was ambulance, there was fire, like ton of people. They were trying to get my identification because I had no ID on me at the time. I thought I was being pretty coherent, but I wasn't. They had to ask me several times for like my name and my number and why I was there and all that jazz. They called the helicopter to bring me to Albuquerque. I tried to convince them that we didn't need to take the helicopter because at the time I was scared of flying. I was not a good flyer. And that was my first time in a helicopter. I was like, do we really need to go in a helicopter? And they're like, yeah, your injuries are that bad. And I just remember lying there thinking, this is not how the story's supposed to go. This isn't my script. Like I thought I was doing everything right. You know, you work hard, you work your way up the corporate ladder, you get more stuff, you find your happiness, you meet someone, start having a family. I was doing all that. Although I wasn't really happy, I was chasing my happiness. I thought like the next title would bring me more happiness, but that's not the case. And so there I was waiting for the helicopter. The flight took 19 minutes to get to the trauma center in Albuquerque. I met my orthopedic surgeon, who is also my trauma surgeon. And then the anesthesiologist got his hands on me. And I don't remember anything for the next 5 days after that.
Oh, wow. Did they induce a coma or what?
Yeah, I was pretty drugged up. So I've lived a pretty clean life. So they had a lot of meds on. I was a lot of meds on board. And so there I was in the ICU. And when I was in the ICU, I interviewed my wife for a job. So I was head of marketing and I was a sales and marketing executive at the time. So I interviewed her. I went through the whole interview guide and went through all the questions in the interview guide.
Oh, with your wife? With
my wife. So my wife comes in and she sits down. I said, well, thanks for coming for the interview. I just have a few questions to ask you. She wrote all this down and I went through the whole thing, guys. And then at the end, I was like, I just want to let you know, I've been in a very bad accident. So it might be a little bit longer before I follow up with you. I told her we should buy Amazon stock. So this is 2001. So Amazon's still like a newbie. It's $15 a share. I was like, we should buy Amazon. Amazon, I think, is a good bet. We should get that stock.
Oh, those were the investment gods speaking to you.
But I don't remember any of this. Like she was just writing down notes. I said something. I was like, go find David. It was a mentor of mine. He was the first person I knew who was an executive coach. He was working with our team. So I was like, that's crazy. Of all the people I tell you to go off and find, it's that guy. And he's had a tremendous impact on my life. But yeah, it was nuts. And then, I had moments in the ICU where there was like laughter. And then every now and again, I would just lean over to my wife and I would give her the FU, just like I was pulling at my IVs and they were strapping me down. It was a very interesting 4 to 5 days that I don't have any memory at all. And when I came out of the ICU, they put me on the orthopedic wing of the hospital. I was still in traction. I was all by myself. Visiting hours were over and I was trying to get my bearings. I'm like, what what the heck just happened? So there I was, like in the worst pain of my life. Actually, the worst pain was actually the time I was at the scene. I had a lot of morphine and a lot of meds on board, but still I was so uncomfortable. I was hurting so badly. And that was the start of my recovery.
So how long were you in recovery? What were the injuries first of all?
So I broke multiple bones in my body. The thing that made it a life and death situation, because when my wife got to the hospital, so they had called, people from my company called her and said, hey, Michael's been in an accident. You should really come out to Albuquerque. And so at the time, we had our 3.5-year-old and a 7-month-old, and our 7-month-old was still breastfeeding and nursing and the whole thing. And my wife at first was like, wow, he's crashed before. Why don't you just patch him up and send him back on a plane? And so she's like, I'm not coming out, like, because they didn't know how significant my injuries were. So they called again. They couldn't convince her. The third time, they're like, you got to come out. And she was like, all right, well, how long do I pack for? And they said, we don't know, maybe 7 days. So she flies out and she's checking in with the hospital as she's flying out to Albuquerque from New York. And I'm still in the trauma centers. I'm still in the OR. And when she finally gets to the hospital, they had already briefed her. They set up a nanny to take care of our youngest. And they told the nanny, listen, you're about to take care of a woman's baby and her husband's not going to make it.
Oh, wow.
So my wife is going through all the checklists of like how to take care of Grady, our youngest, like going through it in very thorough detail as it is her style. And the nanny's looking at her like, woman, like, get over to the hospital. Your husband. So what she's been told is your husband's about to die.
Yeah.
And my wife had no idea. And then she got to the hospital. I was still in the trauma center, still in the operating room. And then the vascular surgeon came out and said, hey, your husband's been in a very bad accident. We did the best we could. The next 72 hours are going to be critical. So the vascular injury, so when the left femur shattered, it lacerated the femoral artery of my left leg. So I was bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, New Mexico. And I lost a ton of blood. I needed 34 units of blood product of various sorts over the first 12 hours. And the first surgery lasted about 12, 13 hours. So yeah, multiple broken bones, significant vascular tear in that artery. I had glass all over me because I went through the windshield. Months later, I would just rub my cheek on my right side of my face because it was the right side of my body that went into the windshield. Every now and again, I'd be shaving in the morning and I'd be like, what's that? And it would be a piece of glass that was working its way out of my cheek, but it had been embedded in my cheek for months. So I had moments like that quite frequently because the impact was so great. Things just flew into my body and it just took time for it to work out, which was pretty mind blowing. So yeah, a lot of broken bones, vascular injury. Doctors told me, listen, based on your injuries, you're never going to be back on the bike again. You'll get back on your feet, but you'll walk with a lot of difficulty and you got many more surgeries in front of you. So your life in a moment has radically changed. And they were trying to set the bar pretty low, based on other people that they saw with similar injuries. And so I had this moment of God, when I got on the helicopter, I made a bargain with whoever was listening, hey, if I live, I promise I'm going to do this better. I won't chase happiness anymore. I'm whatever you need me to do, I'm going to do it. I'm going to be a better person. And when I heard that, I got really angry really quickly because the driver had a revoked license. He should not have been driving, but he was. And in a moment, all of our lives got tipped upside down and it was shaken violently. And I had no clue like who I was going to become, like my identity as an athlete, as a husband, as a leader, as a dad was all in question. And I got pretty dark pretty quickly.
So what does, like, when you have this moment and you're all of a sudden you're pessimistic, you're more pessimistic than the doctors. What's going through your mind as far as like grieving with that news?
Well, there was a lot of moments in the hospital, especially when visiting hours were over, where it got dark and it got really lonely, where I would just sit in my hospital bed and cry because it took me a lot of energy to put on the brave face during the day when visiting hours were open. So when my wife came and my mom and dad flew out, and my mom hates flying. So when I saw her out in Albuquerque, I was like, oh, this is a big deal, right? So it took me a while to sort of grasp everything. I had a concussion, like, again, multiple injuries. So I tried to put on the brave face. I tried to put on the optimistic face, like, okay, we got this. We're going to do this. But deep down inside, I was like, this is so unfair. I can't believe this happened to me. What am I going to do? Like, I am the sole breadwinner of this family. I was really scared and I was really angry, and I thought about ways of getting back at the driver. And, I sort of grew up learning it was an eye for an eye. Like, you harm me, I'm going to harm you back, all that. And I stayed in that like mode for a while until a mentor told me, hey, you know what, Michael, everything in life is neutral until you decide to label it. And at first, guys, I was like, what? Like, is this some Skywalker Yoda thing? Like, what is this? Like, everything is neutral until you label it. But when you back away from it, you do realize that things happen in life and we give it reason as to why they happen. And we're quick to label things as good, bad, right, wrong. This is awesome. This stinks. And so he went on to share, like, listen, this happened. You have every right to feel the way you do. And everyone validated what I was feeling. But you don't have to stay a victim to all this. There might be a different pathway that you can take, sort of in essence of, did this happen to you or is this happening for you? Which is a question that can be asked too soon sometimes when we're recovering from something. So I sat with that for a bit and I was like, okay, everything is neutral. And there's some neutrality to every moment. And if we can make that moment just a bit longer, we can be wiser about how we label it, because how we label things frames our perspective, and it really does change how we go forward in the world. And so I sat with that for a bit and I realized, okay, yeah, all right, I see that. And I also found the practice of gratitude when they finally flew me back to New Jersey from Albuquerque, and I went to my third hospital. And through that experience, it's like, okay, so instead of fixating on all the things I can't do anymore and all the things I don't have anymore, how can I place my attention on the things I do have and still can do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the start. So I would do that every day. And then I found the practice of mindfulness to slow things down when I felt overwhelmed. And from there, I decided to call the day, label the day, my last bad day. Because what I realized is that during the course of a day, there's a ton of moments in our lives. And we're really just living moment to moment. And some moments are really bad, horrific, like my accident. And some produce a little frustration, maybe some anger, maybe some worry or anxiety. In other moments, we feel happy and joy and all that, right? So we're feeling all the feels, as the kids would say. And at the end of the day, we get to sum up the day. And what I determined, the declaration I made, is that if I have people in my life who I love and they love me back, then how can I label the full day a bad day?
Mm.
Yeah.
There's just no way. Like, because I still have people in my life who I love and love me back, and we can start over tomorrow. So it's not like unicorns and rainbows and
Right.
a toxic positivity, my last bad day. It was more about like, I still have had bad moments since my accident, but I've made the commitment not to turn a bad moment into a bad day by giving that bad moment more fuel. Like, crap happens, and a lot of times we just add to it by ruminating and festering it, and just that's all we talk about, and then it ruins the whole damn day.
You know, I saw Stephen Colbert interviewed by Anderson Cooper years ago, and Colbert had lost his dad and brothers, I think, in a plane crash when he was like a little kid. I think he was 10 years old or something like that. And he made the comment that he had learned to love the thing that he wished had never happened, and that he didn't necessarily see that event as a gift, but he saw life as a gift, and that life encompasses these sufferings sometimes. And so you kind of made me think of that when you were talking about how that event, as bad as it was, and sort of defining that as your last bad day, did it change mindsets or the way that, other than the gratitude that you mentioned, any other mindsets that you had as you approached things?
Yeah, definitely. One of the things I talk about a lot is just removing all the rocks in your backpack. So growing up, I had the classic Irish temper. I didn't know how to deal with, like, when I felt mad, like I would just like blow my top. And during one Little League game, my parents videotaped the game with like the old like film. I forget, it wasn't like a fancy recorder of today's time. And we did family movies, and they showed the family movie, and I struck out. I was like 6 years old, and I went back to the dugout, and I was throwing my bat, my helmet, and I was pouting, and I watched that, and I was so embarrassed. I was like, oh my God, is that how I am, really? Like, and in a lot of ways, I don't think this was their intent, but they shamed me into not showing my temper anymore. But I wasn't really dealing with all the emotions that led to my temper. So I would just, as I would say, pick up a rock and I'd put it in my backpack, and I would deal with it later. And that's what happens, I think, in life, that a lot of times we just don't know how to deal with some things. So we pick up a rock, we put it in our backpack, and we say we're going to deal with it later. We keep it all in. And at first, there's just a few rocks in our backpack. We walk around with it. It's not too heavy. We're doing fine. But as we get older, we keep on putting those rocks in our backpack. And after a while, that backpack gets pretty dang heavy. And our shoulders start to ache and our knees start to like buckle. And if the conditions are right, like it was with my accident, you'll have a moment where your backpack gets blown away, right? Just busted. And I think that's what happened for me. At least that's how I look at it, is that it blew apart some of the limiting beliefs about life, limiting beliefs that I had about me, about others, all those different rocks. Some were pebbles, others were maybe close to a boulder, all that stuff that we carry around with. I was finally able to let some of that go, not all at once, but over time, and really started to work on my mindset through my mindfulness training and study and gratitude and community, to really start to show up for life a little bit different. So the things that would normally bug me in the past was like, okay, well, I got clear on the things that were really important to me, like the first principles. Like, I still get upset, and you can get a different side of me if something is threatening my family. But, I'm going to allow myself to get like more heated, more energetic about that, but not get worked up about some of the other things that are really just a passing moment.
So what did that look like in your daily life once you had this mindset shift?
Yeah, I started doing the morning different. So the very first, like I had this big aha when I was on a physical rehab table. They were doing the rehab and I took a break and I was sort of looking around the room. And I've always been an athlete, so I knew the power of mindset. But I was looking around at all the other patients. Some were getting better, others were not. I was sort of plateauing, and I really just wanted to get home. I wanted familiar smells. I wanted to sleep in my own bed. I wanted quiet, because in the hospital it's almost impossible to get any rest. You know, they put you in the hospital for recovery, but you really can't get much recovery or sleep because there's always someone poking at you or there's always a TV on. And I was so desperate to get better. And I was like, okay, how can I shift my perspective? And I realized it was all about my mindset, how I was looking at things, sort of in the spirit, like you go where your eyes go. If you look at something more positively, you're going to go in that direction, right? So it's a phrase from the cycling world as well as other worlds. The best way around a turn is not to look straight ahead at the tree, because you're going to run into the tree. You want to look around the bend, and that's the fastest way to get around a bend. So I started to do my mornings differently, and that became my morning routine. So it became some breath work. It became a gratitude practice, some movement, but mainly it's setting your intentions as to how you wish to show up in the day. So many of us current day wake up, grab our phone, and off to the hamster wheel we go.
Yeah.
What did you find, and I like the phrase that you go where your eyes go, because it's so true, but what did you find that you began to fix your eyes upon?
I was really trying to look at more of the possibilities that I had in front of me, in a very micro sense. So growing up, I had these big lofty goals. Some were unrealistic. I was going to play shortstop for fill in the blank team. So dreams that a lot of kids have growing up, like you're going to go pro in whatever you're going to go pro in, or you want to go pro in. For me, I still had some big goals when it came to my career, but I started breaking things down in bite-sized pieces. Part of my recovery was about how can I make incremental change consistently over time. So when I was going through my rehab, they would measure my progress with a little almost like a ruler that would show how much my joints were flexing and extending. So it was just a way to measure progress. And that my focus was, how can I get 1 degree more of flexion in my knee? And I thought, if I can get 1 more degree of flexion in my knee, every other day, if I did that for a few days or a few weeks, I could have 5 degrees of flexion in a month, as opposed to, I want 5 degrees of flexion right now. So I started really breaking things down in bite-sized pieces that I felt I could do day in and day out. And believing that if I could string enough of those days together, I would eventually get to my ultimate goal. And so that became my focus. So a little bit of that long-term goal, that big dream, coupled with what are we doing short-term here in this moment.
Yeah. And a lot of times reframing is an overlooked tool. I can decide the mindset that I want to have toward something that's happened in life. And you can decide to say, you can decide to accept what the doctors say. I guess I'm never going to ride my bike again. You can decide that losing that client was a really detrimental problem for your business. Or you can decide, hey, it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to get better. It's an opportunity to read more and recover my body instead of riding my bike every day. I can always have a control over my mindset. And a lot of times we have this default, I joke about being more pessimistic, but a lot of times that default is not the most helpful, but it's not a conscious decision either. It's impacted by my environment, the people around me, patterns of behavior, and how I've dealt with things in the past. So having the mindset, I can totally see the benefit of that. And being mindful, something as simple as like being thankful early in the day, that's changed my life a lot. I have a little notepad in my room, or I write 3 things I'm thankful for. And sometimes they're like the dumbest things ever. They're like the smallest little tiny things, and sometimes they're things that I've always had, I've just never thought to be thankful for. The other day it was my AC was struggling to get below 74. And I was like, I was ticked off, but I woke up the next morning. I was like, you know what? I'm thankful I have AC. Like I could have been born 100 years ago and I wouldn't even have it. I have AC. That's a pretty good deal.
That is a pretty good deal. Yeah, absolutely. I was thankful this morning for our generator last night because we lost power twice last night because there was a wild storm that came through. So the fact that we were in a position to buy a generator and it worked and it kept our AC on. I woke up today a little bit more tired than normal because it was a tough night of sleep, but I was damn skippy happy that we had a generator.
I had a business coach, still work with him. But when we first started working together like 2 years ago, he would start every call with, "Hey, Sanger, what's the good news?" And I hated it. And I told him, I was like, this is the hardest question you asked me in the whole hour-long session, because I never would like have good news. I would have to think about it. And over time, I got better at it. And over time, they actually started to be good news, not just bad news that's no longer relevant. That used to be it. It was, what's the good news? Well, there was this bad thing that's not happening anymore. That was my good news. But now it was like truly good news. And so I started to ask that question to other people. And some people reacted the way I did. They're like, oh man, what is the good news? My team, now we do it every time we talk. What's the good news in our weekly meeting? And I noticed some people, their good news, like I'll ask a client, and maybe it's not a question they get very frequently. Their good news will be that they have no bad news. And I go, you know what? Like that's a start. At least you were able to answer.
That's a start.
It's a breakthrough, in fact, because I mean, a lot of people don't realize that that's actually happening, right? I would do the same thing. I was running a team for a number of years, and we would start every team meeting with, what are you grateful for? And we just kind of go around the table, and there might be 15 or 20 people in the room. And one of the things that was interesting that started to happen, and I didn't intend it to happen this way, because I was just looking at leaning into gratitude because I knew the science behind what it did to your mindset and your body to have gratitude, is they started mentioning the other people on the team. Well, I'm thankful for so-and-so that they do this, or I'm grateful that so-and-so called this client, or I'm grateful. And it had this double effect of bringing the team together in addition to the gratitude each person was experiencing individually.
It's a powerful tool. And, a lot of our hard wiring is all about survival. So we are going to pay attention to the threats or the bad news. You hear this, you guys probably hear this all the time in the line of work you do. For leaders, we often sort of gear towards what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, what's not working, because we love to solve a problem. It feels good for the ego. It's a little bit of a dopamine hit. And we blow past what's working, what's good. And so having, Shawn, like a gratitude practice before the meeting, or like what's the good news, like all that stuff is so important, because it helps counterbalance like all the negative news that we might face during the course of the day. Yeah.
In the investment world, a lot of times people ask me, well, what do you think is going to happen with the market the rest of the year? And it's even the tone is like, you need to tell me what's the problems, what I need to look out for. Well, I mean, Hey, before we get to the bad, the good news is you've got double-digit returns in your super conservative portfolio so far this year. So like let's be grateful for where we are. And I think it requires like stopping, bringing yourself out of the world and being mindful and having a purposeful practice of writing it down. What do you say to people who are like, mindfulness, like the gratitude thing? Okay, yeah, sure, whatever. But overall, waste of time. I got more important stuff.
We got more important stuff to do. We got business to do. We got to get going.
Yeah.
Right? And I think still, although we talk about mindfulness a lot more current day than say back in 2001 when I discovered it, like for the first 15 years of my practice, I didn't mention it to anyone, because I didn't want anyone to believe that I was going soft, because that was sort of the connotation. Oh, it's a little bit of a soft thing. You're losing your edge. But here's the thing about mindfulness that I think every business leader would really appreciate. In fact, I've gotten to the point now here as we speak, if a business doesn't have a mindfulness program, I think they're leaving business on the table, because what mindfulness teaches us is how to expand our awareness so we can see all of it. Like we've talked about already today, like seeing all the different moments in life. So, and hopefully eliminate some blind spots so we can see the good.
When you say a mindfulness program, how's that show up?
It's making mindfulness a way of doing work. So it's encouraging like a moment, for example, of just, hey, before a meeting, let's take a minute to like center ourselves, ground ourselves, let go of the past meetings that we've already had today that you may be ruminating in your mind. And let's just take a minute or two to like slow our breath down, get focused on this meeting right in front of us. It's the idea of like, hey, before a big pitch or a big presentation, the way we do it here is that we just find a way to like center ourselves, slow things down, slow the game down so we can make that pitch to be as impactful as possible. It's our ability to focus, because what mindfulness does when we have fixed awareness, say, typically on our breath, what happens is we focus in our breath and our mind wanders. So we notice when our mind's wandering and then we come back to our breath. That's the practice. So we might be working on our computer, right? We're working on a big important deck or an important email. And then in the upper right-hand corner of our laptop, there's a DM or an IM. It pulls our attention away. So what we are able to learn and get better at is like when our attention gets pulled away, we can come back to what we're working on so we can have greater focus. The other thing that mindfulness allows us to do is meet moments of change with something called equanimity, which is basically a sense of like calm when things get really chaotic.
Yeah.
So when I talk to business leaders and I say, hey, if you had a team that had overall more awareness of the business and about what was happening and greater focus, and they could adapt to change with a little bit more grace, would that be good for your business? And most business leaders will say, yeah, sign me up. And that's what mindfulness can help us do. I think current day with, since we went through the pandemic, I think mindfulness sort of gets niched as this, hey, if you're stressed out, it's a mental health thing. And there's some real benefit in terms of how it can help alleviate some mental health concerns and worry and stress and depression and anxiety and all that jazz. But it can be so much more than that. It really is about expanding our awareness so we can see the things that we need to work on, things that are working, focus, and then that equanimity piece.
Yeah, it's like the gym isn't just for fat people trying to lose weight. The gym's for everybody. The gym's for everybody.
Yeah.
And so mindfulness is for everybody, no matter, it's not a choice between mindfulness and depression.
Yeah.
It's a choice between being a little bit better. So I want to be a little bit better. And before I was really aware of my own mind state throughout the day, I had no idea, but I started to notice this. I'd be in a meeting and I'd just not even breathing. I'm sitting there holding my breath, waiting to say what I was going to say because I'm not really being present. I'm not focused on my breath. I'm not focused on thinking about the things I need to think about. I'm thinking about all these things I can't control. That's causing me to tense up and freeze. Or I would go from one meeting to the next meeting. I'd like walk as fast as I can across the office, get to that meeting, give myself, even if it's 60 seconds where I can do nothing, look at nothing, not answer an email, not answer a phone call, not look at anything, just sit there, close my eyes, sit down and wait for this meeting to start. I am like 100 times better. It is a sports performance hack.
Yeah, I think mindfulness is one of those terms that can mean some different things to different people. You're talking about breathing. I was at an assisted stretching session yesterday, and the person who was doing the work, the therapist there, she was telling me she said, all right, when I push this, I'll stretch you. I want you to hold your breath and push against me. So I was working real hard. I was holding my breath. I was pushing against her. And we did that about 3 times. And she said, you're really struggling with that. I said, what do you mean? She goes, I told you to not hold your breath. I go, oh, okay. Yeah, I got to work on that.
Whoopsie.
Yeah,
you were having a hard time with that. But when we talk about mindfulness, I read a book by a former Buddhist monk, Dan Dapani, and we actually had him on the podcast a couple of years ago. And he was talking about the unwavering power of focus, and that when you're looking at mindfulness, it's as important to be aware of where your awareness go, to be mindful of where your awareness goes, and if it's on the right thing. So, like if you're playing football and you're trying to run through a hole in the line, but you're wanting to make sure you're not getting tackled by the linebacker, he said, then your awareness just shifted to the linebacker. Your awareness shouldn't be on that. Your awareness should be on the task. And I think that it's so easy to get distracted when we're looking at trying to be mindful. It's so easy to get distracted by all the other things. Do you find that this breathing and this sort of centering is helping you stay focused on the things you ought to be focused on?
Absolutely, Shawn. Like it really goes back to paying attention and you go where your eyes go. So like, let's get focused on the things that truly matter and not all the different shiny objects that are plentiful nowadays. And so a mindfulness practice, when you do it consistently over time, it's not a quick fix, but over time, one can develop greater focus. So instead of like thinking about the linebackers and then running right into the linebackers, you pay attention to like what's here right now and try to find the hole in the line and run through the hole. And
right, you were talking about avoiding the tree. You'll try and avoid the tree. You're going to hit the tree. Yeah,
you're going to hit the tree, or you're going to hit the linebackers. And so many of us, if we look at the breath as like a regulator for the body, a lot of folks, saying you're talking about holding your breath in a meeting. 85% of us hold our breath as we do email. There's something called email apnea, and we're holding our breath as we're typing away, and you start doing the math of how many emails you crank out each day and how long you're holding your breath each day. Well, that's a way of preventing the body from doing its magic. And there's a whole bunch of us that deal with hypertension. And so if we can find a way to play with our breath and bring things down, we can start to control some of these conditions that many of us deal with a little more holistically. We might still need Western medicine, but maybe not as much of it. And so we can meet our moments with a little bit more grace, and we can have greater focus. We're meeting a ton in corporate life, whether we have a corporate America or individual business owners. Our meetings really do stink. Like they're not productive because people are not really focused and setting their intentions on how they want to show up in the meetings. So we need, and folks aren't listening. So we need another meeting to make up for the poor meeting. And so we spend all our time in meetings. And I think if we can bring a mindfulness way of approaching our work, we might be able to have fewer meetings, which then we can get some of the work done at work and then hopefully save some of our personal time for personal time stuff.
Yeah. So this is obviously a transformational experience for you. You went from being in, the marketing team and, leading marketing to moving into a different area, and then did another transformational experience. To want to ask you about, you rode your bike across the country. Is that right?
Yeah, we did. That was a bucket list thing that I had like growing up. I was like, it would be really cool to ride my bike across the country. And
so where did you start from, and where did you go?
Yeah, I started in Astoria, Oregon, right there on the coast. And this whole transformation took some time. So like I had my accident. I went back to my corporate life. But I went back to my corporate life with a different script. And I pressure tested all the things I talk about today for 13 years in corporate America, like at the highest levels of my company. So when I left the company, I had a team of about 1,000 people and a P&L of $4 billion. So more money than I thought was really wise for me to be responsible for, but that's a whole other podcast, right? So it wasn't like I had my accident and then all of a sudden I went off and did what I'm doing today. I went back into corporate life and really tried to pressure test mindfulness and gratitude there before I started talking about it openly. And so this notion of riding my bike across the country, I ran into more limiting beliefs by people. A lot of people are like, why can't you just be happy? like you got back on the bike, you're sort of back in the swing of things. You're probably never going to be able to like ride your bike across the country. And much like the doctors told me, I would never get back on my bike again. It was a limiting belief, but just in a different way. And I never let go of the dream of like one day trying to do it. So in 2021, I had my left knee replaced, which they thought was going to happen from the get-go, about 5 years out from my accident. And I got 20 years out of it, which is pretty good, a 4X return. And in 2022, we rented an RV. We brought our 2 dogs. My wife always had a dream of RVing across the country, and I had this dream of cycling across the country. So we put both dreams together. We took 6 weeks off. It's the longest I've been not working, except for the time I was in the hospital. And we went to Oregon and Montana, and Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and then into DC.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was the roughest part of that trip? I mean, mentally, not necessarily physically, but.
Well, once we got east of the Rockies, and so the summer 2022, which the summer here of 2024 feels like the same, it was pretty wicked hot. So we had some temperatures in Missouri that were just beating down on us. So that was really challenging. And there were times where I was like, oh my gosh, it's so humid. But there was a lot of like just great days. There wasn't a day where I woke up and thought, I don't want to ride my bike. I was like, no, we're going to do this. And what was really cool is I got to see parts of the country I've never seen before. And we have such a gorgeous country. Like for people that haven't traveled the United States, like from the Rocky Mountains to the Tetons to Yellowstone to the Pacific Northwest to the Flint Hills of Kansas, through parts of Appalachia as we get closer to the East Coast, it's gorgeous.
So you're sleeping in the RV at night, and then your wife's kind of trailing you as you. as you go?
Well, so I would wake up, I'd get on the road. She would do her morning routine. She would walk the dog. She would go for a little bit of a power walk herself, get some breakfast. And then generally she would meet up with me about 75 miles in. We'd do like a check-in. Sometimes I would like fuel up, fill the water bottles up, maybe get a snack from the RV. And then she would drive ahead and set up camp at the next RV campsite. So there was only one day where she was really behind me. We were in Wyoming and there were some major thunderstorms. And the really cool thing about thunderstorms out in the West is that you can see them coming for miles. Like on the East Coast, it's a little bit different. So she would leapfrog me. So I'd ride a couple miles. We'd look at the storm. I'd ride a couple more miles. And then if it really started to open up, I would get into some shelter and get away from the thunder and the lightning, which was really my main concern. I didn't want to be out there in a lightning storm. So we met so many great people, people that, I think this is what we deal with, is that the fringes and the divide and which team you're on and all that. I think generally 99% of the people out there are good people. They want a good life. We might differ in how we're going to actually do it, but we support each other and we root for each other when we really just connect. And we met a lot of those people along the way, so it was, I rode for 41 days. We had 45 days in total. We took 4 rest days and ended up in Washington, D.C. That's where my wife and I met post college. So it was fitting to cycle up to the Lincoln Memorial, and some friends were there, and it was a great experience. Such a beautiful country filled with beautiful people. Yeah.
That's really special. So what does that work out to, average daily miles on the days you were riding?
About 92 miles a day.
That's so hardcore.
Yeah, I was on a total knee replacement that was less than a year old. And every day we would grab a milkshake. So we would find the local dairy bar. Now, some towns didn't have a proper ice cream place. So we whipped up a milkshake in the RV, but I got, a milkshake at the end of the day, and then we'd get on Instagram and we'd do a little thing called Milkshakes with Michael. And I would recap the day and just talk about the beautiful country we have and the beautiful people I met. So there were some tough days. The extreme weather was really tough. And there was one day in Oregon, in Mitchell, Oregon, where I started off and we climbed to about 5,000 feet. And at the top, it was raining. And as I got to the other side, the temperature fell to 37 degrees and it was pouring. And I started to shiver so violently, it was hard to steer the bike. And so that was day 5. And I was really thinking holy cow. And
starting to question this whole plan, right?
Yeah, I really was. I was like, I'm going to die out here. I really felt like I was that cold. And my wife was back at the RV camp, and that section of Oregon has no cell phone reception. So I couldn't phone her, and there was nothing out there, no homes. It wasn't like you're going through a suburb. It was,
you can call her and say, bring me some gloves or something.
Yeah. And so I kept on pedaling and I was shivering, and I came up to a farmhouse, and I was like, I got to knock on this door. I got to get some shelter. But I still had to keep my eye on the road because I knew my wife was coming down this road and I needed to flag her down. So I went to the farmhouse and knocked on the door, and I was like, hey, can I just sort of hang out on your porch to get out of the rain? And the woman who answered said yes. And then her husband came by a little bit later and offered me a blanket and some coffee. And I just stood there. I couldn't drink the coffee because I was shivering so badly. I have a video about that on YouTube. I was just like, whoa, 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 whoa. You're just shivering and teeth chattering, the whole thing. And then I saw the RV coming. And so here I am, just soaked to the bone. I'm in my cycling shoes, and I run out on the slippery driveway, and I jump up and down, and my wife almost missed me. because she wasn't expecting to see anyone there. And so out of the corner of her eye, she saw me and she stopped. And that day was a day that we cut it short. I was only, like halfway through the intended length of the trip that day. And it took me the rest of the day to get warm. So I was pretty cold, pretty close to being hypothermic, I think. So don't know for certain because I never went to the hospital because there wasn't a hospital nearby. But those extreme weather days, those were the most difficult. But then there were days where, God, it was just absolutely gorgeous and blue sky and just you soak it all in and just.
What was the biggest thing you learned from that journey across the country?
The biggest thing, that's such a great question. I think there's just power in community. Like the way I looked at that ride is that I wasn't riding by myself, just like my whole recovery. So, I come on like your show and I'm here and I talk about the story from my perspective, but I'm only here today because of so many people who helped me, starting with my wife and obviously my girls and my extended family. But even, all the people that came to my aid the morning of the accident, the state trooper, the police, the fire, ambulance, they got called and they came to support and to help. And they didn't ask me any questions to qualify whether or not they were going to offer me help. They just helped. No questions asked. And, in today's world, sometimes we just we throw up too many labels and we throw up too much judgment and we're allowing ourselves to be divided. And if we can slow it down just a bit and really just see each other's humanity and find a way to come together and support each other. To me, the trip really underscored my whole recovery is that I didn't do it alone. We don't do any of this alone. And I didn't ride across the country alone. I brought everyone with me and we celebrated this together. We all had different roles. My wife was driving the RV. My dogs were there as her emotional support creatures. I did the pedaling, but there's a whole bunch of people cheering me on, and I needed all their support too on some days. And so my feeling is it just really underscored the whole concept that together we go far. And I believe this is the optimistic bent in me. I believe we can remember this part of who we are across the planet in this country, that we need each other. We don't do it by ourselves, and we can find a way to come together. And we'll have differences, but we can find a way to disagree on those differences without being disagreeable and find a pathway forward. I believe in that more strongly today than when I started the trip, because I've met so many of the people across this country, and we're hurting. A lot of people are, but we don't heal by throwing more stones at each other. We only heal through love and understanding and connection.
Thanks for that. Hey, final question for you, Michael. What would you say is your top decision-making tip for business owners?
Slow down. I would say,
it's great advice.
Slow down.
I'm not talking about your advice for the driver though. Your advice for business.
Well, the advice for the driver, the advice for the driver would be put down your phone and drive, right? So that would be the advice for the, but
stay in your lane.
If you're stay in your lane, you need a racy chart for that. But you think about the decisions that business owners and business leaders have to make. They're usually decisions that cost thousands, if not millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Be thoughtful about those decisions. You don't make your best decisions reactively. You make your best decisions when you're thoughtful about what you're about to go into. So slow it down. The world is speeding up thanks to a whole bunch. Find ways to slow it down and be thoughtful about the decisions you're going to make, because they can be costly if you make a reactive decision.
Where can people connect with you and the work that you're doing?
Well, I'm on everyone's favorite business platform. I'm on LinkedIn. They can also, I'm a LinkedIner. So they can also find me on my website, which is michaelobrienshift.com. And, most of the work I do is around executive leadership, helping leaders lead better, but also bringing mindfulness into their corporations so they can also have their last bad day. So that's the best place to get me.
Perfect. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks a lot, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really love what you guys are putting out into the world, so keep it up.
Hey, thanks for that. My takeaway from talking to Michael is when he was talking about you go where your eyes go, that is so true, that we have to be aware of where our awareness is. And that if our awareness is on the negativity, we're going to get more of that. If our awareness is on the gratitude and how we find true happiness, that's what we're going to get more of. And that making that a conscious part of our daily routine, whether that's in team meetings, whether that's in morning ritual or whatever, is just being aware that you are going to follow where your eyes go. And so you have to make sure you're looking at the right thing.
Yeah, that similar vein as to my takeaway. He makes his gratitude a practice because by focusing on it, it's going to be more important, right? I can't expect to be naturally grateful, just like I can't expect to naturally be good at business. Like I have all of these procedures and systems and routines in place so that I can build habits, because those habits help me do the things in my company that are necessary so I can meet my goals. Well, same thing with gratitude, or with having a commitment to the last bad day concept, is if I don't have systematic routines, if I don't have habits, I'm not going to be grateful. Just like I have routines around my physical health, I have to have routines around my mindset.
You just made a great decision to listen to this episode of Decidedly. Make another great decision by subscribing to the show and leaving us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. We appreciate the support. It helps business owners like you find our community and defeat bad decision-making in their own lives. For more decision-making insights, check us out at decidedlypodcast.com, on Instagram at decidedlypodcast, or grab a copy of Sanger and Shawn's books from the links in the show notes. Finally, we'd like to thank Shelby Peterson of Transcend Media for editing and post-production of the show. Thanks for listening. I'm Morgan, your producer, and this is Decidedly.